I don't owe you anything, mother, you chose your sacrifices, not me. Those words hit me like a slap across the face in the middle of Riley's diner where half the town was having lunch. Plates stopped clattering. Conversations died mid-sentence. My son Callan stood there in his expensive suit looking at me like I was a stranger begging for spare change. My hands trembled as I reached for the table to steady myself. The old purse I'd carried for 15 years sat between us, the same one I'd used to pay his college application fees. He picked it up and dropped it back in front of me like it disgusted him. I tried to speak, but only his name came out as a whisper. Callan turned and walked toward the door. Every eye in that diner followed him, then slowly turned back to me. The pity in their faces burned worse than his words. I stood there alone, surrounded by people, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my 52 years. That was the moment everything changed. My name is Mara Vidal and I've been a seamstress in Green Hill for 23 years. I work from a small stall at the town market, stitching hems, mending torn school uniforms, fixing wedding dresses for brides who can't afford the fancy shops in the city. My fingers are calloused and my back aches by evening, but I've never complained. This work put food on our table after my husband died. Callan was only 7 when the factory fire took his father. I remember holding him that night, promising I'd give him everything his father would have wanted him to have. A good education. A better life. A chance to build something real. I kept that promise even when it meant skipping meals or wearing the same 2 dresses for years. People in town know me as the quiet woman who always smiles, who never turns away someone who can't pay. They don't know how many nights I've cried into my pillow wondering if my sacrifices meant anything at all. Every morning I wake at 5 before the sun touches the hills. I make tea in the same chipped cup I've had since Callan was born, then sit at my sewing machine while the world is still dark. There's peace in those early hours, just the hum of the needle and the rhythm of thread pulling through fabric. By 7 I'm at the market setting up my stall, arranging spools of thread by color, laying out the day's repairs. My neighbor Beatrice always stops by with complaints about her knees or her daughter-in-law. I listen and smile. That's what people need sometimes, just someone who'll listen. Around noon Mrs. Hollins brings me soup. She makes too much, she says, but I know she worries I don't eat enough. When a customer can't afford to pay, I wave them off. Next time I tell them, though I know next time might never come. Beatrice shakes her head at me. You're too soft, Mara, she says. The world will eat you alive. But kindness is all I have left to give. I still remember the day Callan came home from school with a wooden bird he'd carved in shop class. He was 14, skinny and shy, but his eyes lit up when he showed it to me. Look what I made, Mom, he said, holding it like it was made of gold. The wings were uneven and the beak was crooked, but to me it was perfect. That night I sold my wedding ring, the only thing of value I had left. I told him it was for groceries, but the next week I bought him a small set of woodworking tools from the pawn shop. He cried when I gave them to him. I'll build you a house someday, Mom, he promised, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. I'll take care of you forever. I believed him. How could I not? He was my whole world, the reason I kept going after losing everything else. That wooden bird still sits on my kitchen windowsill, even now faded and cracked, but still they're a reminder of the boy who once loved me unconditionally. When Callan turned 26, he came to me with a business plan. He wanted to start a carpentry workshop making custom furniture for restaurants and offices. He'd been working odd jobs since college, saving every penny, but it wasn't enough. The bank rejected his loan application 3 times. No collateral, they said. No credit history. No chance. He sat at my kitchen table that night, his head in his hands, looking defeated. I couldn't stand seeing him like that. So I went to the bank myself. I told them I'd co-sign the loan, put my house up as security. The loan officer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Brennan, looked at me with concern. Mrs. Vidal, he said carefully, if anything goes wrong you could lose everything. I know, I replied. But a mother's name opens doors. He sighed and slid the papers across the desk. It can close them too, he warned. I signed anyway, my hand steady even though my heart was pounding. Callan got his $50,000 loan and I became responsible for every penny. The workshop opened 6 months later in an old warehouse on the edge of town. I spent every free hour there sweeping floors, organizing tools, bringing lunch for Callan and his 2 workers. My sewing machine stayed silent more often than not, but I didn't mind. This was for our future. Callan worked late into the night sanding wood, staining tables, building cabinets with such care and precision. People started noticing his work. Orders came in slowly at first, then faster. A restaurant ordered 20 tables. A hotel wanted custom bed frames. I watched him grow more confident, more successful, and my heart swelled with pride. This is what I sacrificed for, I thought. This moment right here. He'd hug me before I left each night. "Thanks, Mom," he'd say. "I couldn't do this without you." Those words made everything worth it, the aching fingers, the empty bank account, the years of going without. I believed we were building something together, a future where he'd be secure and I'd finally rest knowing I'd done right by him. Then success changed him. Within a year, Callan moved the business to the city 40 miles away. Bigger clients, he explained. Better opportunities. He hired a manager and 4 more workers. He bought a car, then an apartment. His phone calls became shorter, less frequent. When I visited the new workshop, his employees didn't know who I was. One of them thought I was the cleaning lady. Callan laughed it off awkwardly but didn't correct them. I swallowed the hurt and stayed quiet. I didn't want to embarrass him in front of his staff. He walked me out that day, barely looking at me. "I've got a meeting, Mom," he said, checking his watch. "I'll call you later." But he didn't call. Not that week or the next. I told myself he was just busy, that success required focus. I made excuses for him to neighbors who asked why he never visited. "He's doing so well," I'd say, smiling. "I'm so proud." But at night, alone in my small house, I'd stare at the phone, willing it to ring. The first letter from Riverside Bank came on a Tuesday morning. It was addressed to me, thick and official looking. I opened it with shaking hands, not understanding the words. Missed payment. Outstanding balance. Default notice. I read it 3 times before the panic set in. I called Callan immediately, but it went to voicemail. I called again an hour later. He answered, sounding irritated. "What is it, Mom? I'm in a meeting." I told him about the letter, my voice trembling. He sighed like I was bothering him with something trivial. "I'll handle it," he said. "Don't worry about it." But the calls kept coming. More letters. Red stamps. Final warnings. Each time I called him, he had the same excuse. Busy with investors. Closing a deal. Handling finances. His voice grew colder each time, more distant, like I was a stranger interrupting his important life. I stopped calling after a while. The silence between us felt heavier than any words we could have spoken. My 60th birthday came on a rainy October afternoon. I baked a small cake in the morning, vanilla with buttercream frosting, Callan's favorite since he was a boy. I set the table for 2, lit a candle and waited. The hours passed slowly. 3 o'clock became 5, became 7. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the windows. I sat in the dim kitchen watching the candle melt down to nothing. At 9 I finally blew it out. "He's not coming," I whispered to the empty room. I cut myself a slice of cake but couldn't eat it. Outside on his porch across the street, my neighbor Aldrich sat in his rocking chair watching the rain. He was a quiet man, maybe 50, with a gray beard and kind eyes. We'd exchange nods, sometimes brief hellos, but nothing more. That night, though, he looked over at my window and I swear I saw sadness in his face. I turned away before he could see me crying. Aldrich started coming to my market stall after that. He'd buy small things, a spool of thread buttons he probably didn't need. "How are you today, Mara?" he'd ask gently. I'd force a smile and say, "Fine, thank you." But something about his voice made it hard to keep pretending. One afternoon I broke down and told him about Callan, about the business, about how my son barely spoke to me anymore. Aldrich listened without interrupting, his expression calm and understanding. "He must be under pressure," he said finally. "Sometimes success makes people forget what matters." I nodded, grateful for his kindness. I didn't know then that Aldrich worked at Riverside Bank. I didn't know he'd seen my name on those loan documents, seen the missed payments and the mounting debt. He knew everything and said nothing, just kept visiting my stall, asking gentle questions, slowly becoming the only person who seemed to care whether I was okay. The final notice arrived 3 months later. Foreclosure proceedings. Asset seizure. Immediate action required. I sat on my kitchen floor holding the letter, my whole body shaking. They were going to take my house. The only thing I had left. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. How had it come to this? I'd paid every bill I could, scraping together what little money I made, but it wasn't enough. Not even close. The loan was $50,000 and I'd barely made a dent. I hid the letter under my sewing table, like hiding it would make it disappear. When Aldrich came by the market the next day, he found me staring blankly at my hands. "Mara," he said quietly, sitting down across from me. "What's wrong?" I wanted to tell him, but shame choked the words. I just shook my head. He didn't push. He just stayed there, silent and present, until I finally stopped trembling. I didn't know it then, but that was the day everything started to shift. I took the bus to the city the following week. It took 2 hours and cost money I didn't have, but I needed to see Callan face to face. I found his office in a sleek glass building downtown. The receptionist looked at me like I didn't belong. "I'm his mother," I said quietly. She made a call, then told me to wait. I sat in the lobby for 3 hours watching well-dressed people come and go. Finally Callan appeared in an expensive suit, talking on his phone. He froze when he saw me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he hissed, glancing around like I was an embarrassment. I stood up, my legs shaking. "The loan," I said. "It's under my name, Callan. They're going to take my house." His face hardened. "That's your problem," he said coldly. "You signed the papers." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You're my son," I whispered. He looked away. "I didn't ask you to co-sign," he muttered. "That was your choice." Then he walked away, leaving me standing there alone in that cold marble lobby. The collectors came 2 weeks later. 2 men in dark suits, taking photos of my furniture, marking things with stickers. I sat on the couch frozen as they moved through my home, cataloging everything I owned. They were polite but firm. "This is standard procedure, ma'am," one of them said. I nodded, unable to speak. After they left, I sat in the dark for hours. That's where Aldrich found me when he knocked on my door that evening. He didn't ask permission, just came in and sat beside me. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know what's happening." I looked at him, confused. "How do you know?" He hesitated, then sighed. "I work at Riverside Bank, Mara. I've seen your file." The shame hit me like a wave. "So you know," I whispered. "You know I'm losing everything." He nodded slowly. "But maybe," he said carefully, "it's time someone reminded your son who helped him stand." I didn't understand what he meant then, but something in his voice gave me a small flicker of hope. Aldrich started an audit the next day. As a senior loan officer, he had the authority to review accounts, and I didn't know this until later, but he flagged discrepancies in Callan's repayment records. A week later, Riverside Bank called me, not Callan. I answered the phone, my hands shaking. "Mrs. Vidal, this is Rebecca Torrance from Riverside Bank. We need to confirm some details about the loan under your name." I answered every question precisely. Yes, the loan was for my son's business. Yes, my house was the collateral. Yes, I was the primary guarantor. There was a pause on the other end. "Then legally, Mrs. Vidal, the property and the debt are still under your authority." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said carefully, "you still have options." I hung up slowly, my mind spinning. I still had power. After all this time, after all the humiliation, I wasn't completely helpless. Aldrich called me that night. "Did the bank contact you?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "Good," he said. "Now we wait." Callan's business account was frozen 3 days later. I didn't know about it until he called me screaming. "What did you do?" he yelled into the phone. "What did you tell the bank?" I stayed quiet, letting his rage wash over me. "They froze everything, Mom, everything," he shouted. "Fix this." I took a breath. "I didn't do anything, Callan," I said calmly. "The loan is in my name, remember? That's my problem, not yours." The line went silent. Then he hung up. Aldrich told me later that Callan had stormed into the bank demanding answers, shouting my name in front of everyone. The clerks had stared. Other customers had watched. And Aldrich, calm and composed, had simply said, "Perhaps you should speak to Mrs. Vidal." Callan had left pale and shaking. For the first time in years, my son realized he wasn't in control. That the foundation he'd built his empire on was my name, my house, my sacrifice. And I could take it all away with one word. He showed up at my house the next evening. I was mending a jacket when I heard the knock. I opened the door and there he was, looking rattled and desperate. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me. I followed him into the living room, staying calm. "You need to call the bank," he demanded. "Tell them to release my accounts." I sat down slowly. "I can't do that, Callan," I said. "It's in my name." The same words he'd thrown at me echoed back at him. His face turned red. "This is my business, Mom, my life." I stayed quiet. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "You're sabotaging me," he spat. "After everything I built." I looked at him with sad, tired eyes. "I didn't build it," I said softly. "I just paid for it." He stared at me like I was a stranger. Then he turned and slammed the door so hard the walls shook. I sat there alone, listening to his car roar away, feeling nothing but exhaustion. Aldrich met me at a cafe 2 days later. He brought a folder full of papers and laid them out carefully. "These are your rights, Mara," he said. "You're the guarantor, which means you have legal authority over the collateral and the loan terms." I stared at the documents, overwhelmed. "I don't want revenge," I whispered. "I just want my house." He nodded. "I know, and you'll get it, but your son needs to face consequences. Not from anger, but from truth." He showed me a form. "If you sign this, the bank will begin formal proceedings to reclaim the debt. Callan's assets will be frozen, then liquidated if necessary." My hands shook. "Will he lose everything?" "Possibly," Aldrich said. "But losing everything might be the only way he learns what he had." I picked up the pen. "Justice doesn't need noise," he said quietly. I signed my name, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't revenge. This was just the truth finally catching up. Callan's investors pulled out within the week. Word spread fast that his accounts were frozen, that there were legal issues. His employees quit. Equipment was repossessed. The workshop he'd built so proudly started to crumble. He called me 5 times in one day. I didn't answer. He showed up at the market, desperate and frantic. "Mom, please," he begged. "I'll lose everything." I kept stitching the fabric in my hands. "You already lost what mattered," I said without looking up. He tried to argue, but I just shook my head. People were watching. Neighbors who'd seen him humiliate me in the diner now watched him beg. Beatrice gave him a cold stare. He left defeated, and I went back to my work. That night Aldrich stopped by. "He's called the bank 6 times today," he said. "Threatening lawsuits. Threatening me." I sighed. "Will you be okay?" Aldrich smiled. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Mara. I'll be fine." The question is, will you? I nodded slowly. Yes, I will. Callan went to the bank one last time. He stormed in demanding to see whoever was in charge, yelling my name like a curse. Aldrich met him in the lobby, calm as ever. Mr. Vidal, he said firmly. Lower your voice. Callan pointed a shaking finger at him. You did this, he spat. You and my mother. Aldrich took off his glasses and looked him in the eye. No, he said quietly. You did this the day you forgot who believed in you. The lobby went silent. Other customers stared. Callan's face turned white. Aldrich handed him a paper. Your mother has full legal rights to reclaim her collateral, he said. The business, the equipment, everything tied to that loan is technically hers. Callan looked like he'd been punched. That's not possible, he whispered. Aldrich's expression didn't change. It's very possible, and it's already happening. Callan stumbled out of the bank, and I heard later he just sat in his car for an hour staring at nothing. Within a month, Callan's company was dissolved. The workshop was emptied. His apartment was repossessed. He ended up sleeping in the old warehouse, surrounded by broken furniture and bills he couldn't pay. I didn't know this until Beatrice told me she'd seen him there, looking thin and lost. I felt a pang of sadness but not guilt. He'd made his choices. One night, going through boxes, he found a stack of letters I'd sent him over the years. Letters he'd never opened. He read them one by one. In every single one, I told him I was proud. That I loved him. That I believed in him. The last letter ended with the same words as always, I'll always be here. He sat there in the dark, surrounded by the ruins of his pride, and finally understood what he'd thrown away. But understanding and fixing are two different things, and the gap between them felt impossibly wide. A small envelope arrived at my door 3 weeks later. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page written in Callan's messy handwriting. Mom, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't deserve for you to. I was wrong about everything. I thought success meant I didn't need anyone, but I was just running from the guilt of never being enough. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. There was something else in the envelope, a key. The last key to the workshop. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight. Tears ran down my face, but I wasn't sure if they were from sadness or relief. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, but I also wasn't ready to forget. Some wounds need time, and time doesn't rush for anyone. I went to Riverside Bank the following Monday, dressed in my cleanest outfit. Aldrich met me at the entrance. You ready? He asked gently. I nodded. We walked inside and Rebecca Torrance greeted us warmly. Mrs. Vidal, she said. Let's finalize this. I signed the papers that cleared the debt and transferred ownership of the workshop property to my name. The building Callan had once called his was now legally mine. It felt surreal. You did the right thing, Rebecca said. Protecting yourself isn't cruelty, it's survival. I thanked her quietly. Aldrich walked me out. What will you do with it? He asked. I looked at the key in my hand. Something good, I said. Something that helps people like me. He smiled. That sounds perfect. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The weight I'd carried for so long was finally lifting, and I was ready to stand on my own again. I reopened the workshop 3 months later, but not as a carpentry business. I turned it into a tailoring cooperative, hiring widows and single mothers, women who needed work and hope. We made clothes, repaired uniforms, stitched quilts for charity. The sound of sewing machines filled the space where Callan's saws used to roar. It felt right. Women laughed while they worked, sharing stories and struggles. I paid fair wages, something I'd never had myself. Beatrice stopped by one afternoon and smiled. Look at you, Mara, she said. You've built something beautiful. I looked around at the busy room and nodded. It wasn't revenge or bitterness that built this. It was resilience. Aldrich visited, often bringing coffee and quiet encouragement. "You've done more than save yourself," he said one day. "You've given others a chance too." I smiled. Maybe that's all I ever wanted to do, to make sure no one felt as alone as I did. One quiet evening 6 months later, there was a knock on the workshop door. I looked up from my sewing machine and froze. Callan stood there, thinner than I remembered, his clothes worn, his eyes tired. He didn't speak, just stood there looking lost. I set down my work and walked over slowly. "I don't deserve to come in," he said quietly. "But I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For not destroying me," he said. "You could have, but you didn't." I looked at him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in," I said. He hesitated, then followed. I poured 2 cups of tea and we sat across from each other in silence. I didn't know what to say and neither did he. But the silence didn't feel angry anymore, just heavy with things that couldn't be rushed. After a while he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I nodded. "I know." That was all. No grand speeches. No dramatic reconciliation. Just 2 broken people trying to find their way back to something that used to be love. Months passed and Callan started visiting more often. He didn't ask for money or help, just sat quietly, sometimes helping fold fabric or sweep the floors. We didn't talk much, but slowly something started to heal. One Sunday he brought me flowers, cheap ones from the grocery store, but flowers nonetheless. "These are for you," he said awkwardly. I took them and smiled. "Thank you." People in town noticed the change. "Mara's son is back," they'd whisper. "Working with her now." It wasn't the life I'd imagined years ago when I signed those loan papers. But it was real and it was ours. As I sat at my sewing machine one morning, sunlight streaming through the window, I realized something. Kindness may be mocked for a season, but time always remembers who planted it. I'd planted love even when it hurt, and now finally it was growing back. Not perfect, not easy, but growing. And that was enough. The thread pulled through the fabric, steady and strong, just like I'd learned to be.